All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jesse Waltall. I'm presenting from the Institute for Sustainability on CSUN pollinator habitat. So first and foremost, let's get our definition straight. What is pollination? So if you look up a definition of that and you get the result from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, it's this fairly long and complicated quote here that pollination is the act of transferring pollen grains from the male anther of a flower to the female stigma so that a plant can create offspring by making seeds, which contain the genetic information to produce a new plant. That's more easily understood, I think, when you look at this visually off to the right. Basically, there's something like a bee, butterfly, something mobile that is helping a plant take pollen from one flower and moving it onto another. So that way, essentially, the sperm meets the egg, and you are able to get offspring in the form of a viable seed for that plant to reproduce. Um, who are the pollinators? Oftentimes, we think first and foremost of bees. So a lot of time we see honeybees around campus, but there are also native bees, solitary bees, bumblebees, which are really big and fuzzy and kind of vibrate flowers and shake the pollen off of them as they land. Other species like butterflies and moths are also great pollinators. And then there are some that we might not think about as much, like birds and bats, or even flies, beetles, and wasps, which might not be the core pollinators, but contribute a bit nonetheless. Why are pollinators important? First off, let's talk about the kind of intangibles. So depending on how you look at the world, depending on how you conceptualize it, I'd say there is some intrinsic value to having living things and biodiversity on Earth, sharing the planet with other forms of life, just the beauty and the joy that comes with that. Cultural significance as well. Pollinators have a lot behind them, and the plants that they support have a lot behind them as well. Think about how many dishes that we cook, or songs, poems that we write or sing, murals that are painted. How many times have you seen a bird or an insect or a plant referenced in one of these things? Or in terms of cooking, you can't do it without that plant, right? It might be the basis for your dish. So there's a lot of culture behind this biodiversity as well. And then if you want to look at the quantifiables, two-thirds of crops rely on pollinators for production. That's over 1,200 different types of food that we're eating. Pollinators and the work that they do contributes $217 billion to the global economy. It also contributes $11.7 billion to the California economy. So that value of crops in California alone are pollinator dependent. And then 85% of flowering plants rely on pollinators for reproduction. 25% of birds rely on the fruits and seeds that are produced as a result of insect pollination in particular. So pollinators are super important and have cascading effects throughout many different areas of our lives and our economies. And this mural here kind of sums it up really nicely. We got some bees there, and they're telling us when we go, we're taking you with us. So basically, without the bees, we don't have food. Food is a basic need. So we need bees and their pollinator friends to, you know, support us in our lives, and therefore we have to help support them in their lives. So we'll talk more about that in the rest of the presentation. Kind of segueing into it, actually, how pollinators are doing, they are not doing too great as a whole. So according to the Center for Biological Diversity, more than half of native bee species in North America that they had enough data to study were in decline, and over 40% of global insect pollinators were highly threatened. The journal Science came out with a study in 2021 that found an average decline of 1.6% per year in butterfly species in the Western United States. And this study looked at 72 different locations of varying types of land use and geography. They were analyzing 262 different species of butterfly, and they made sure that those species had 10 or more years of data spanning over a 42-year period ending in 2018. So a lot of data went into the study, and the overall trend was a decline in butterflies. And then the California Department of Fish and Wildlife put out a statement that 99% of the Western monarch butterfly population has disappeared since the 1980s. So that's a huge, huge decline in on an Earth time scale, a biological time scale, very, very short period of time since the 80s. So I want to kind of talk about monarch butterflies in particular and use them as an example as we work through the rest of this presentation. So taking that number from the 80s, the population of monarch butterflies in California was about 4.5 million. And that's roughly the amount of people that live in the city of LA. So think about all of LA, and all the people are monarchs and they live up and down California. And now fast forward to present day, where we're at about 29,000 at the point that this graphic was made. So the numbers have rebounded a bit. But I think this graphic is still very powerful to put it into perspective of, okay, we went from a population about the size of LA to a population, in this case, about the size of Monterey. And if you look at the dot on the left and the dot all the way to the right, that is to scale of how many monarchs were left at the time that this graphic was created. Um, Monarchs are really unique and interesting. They're kind of a flagship species for pollinators in that looking at their health, we can understand the health of many other species. Monarchs are pretty sensitive. Only about 1 to 4% of individuals will survive into adulthood, and they are migrational. So they will travel up to 3,000 miles, and they can live for up to 6 months, depending on what stage in their migrational and reproductive life cycle they're in. Um, the Xerces Society is a big advocate for monarchs and pollinators in general, and every year they do overwintering counts in California. So basically, monarchs from as far east as the Rockies will fly to the coast of California and spend the winter here. And volunteers for the Xerces Society, you can participate in this every November and January as well. They do another count. Volunteers basically go out to these sites and literally count the monarchs that they see. Of course, there's some estimating going on there where you look at a block and say, okay, I see 10, and then multiply this block by, let's say, 10, so it's about 100 on this tree, let's say. But roughly, they get a good number of how many monarchs are present on a site, and that data is collected and stored in a central database with the Xerces Society and made public. So here are some numbers again. So again, that previous slide with the dots, the numbers have rebounded a bit from being the population of Monterey, but they have gotten nowhere near the population of a large city like LA. And you can see on this chart to the left, we have the blue line of sites that have been observed by the Xerces Society. So lots of more sites being added to their roster of overwintering locations, but the population being observed is not really following that trend. There was a really steep decline from the 80s and then into the 90s. This chart starts at 97, huge decline from there, and then you could call it stable with some rebounds here and there, but it's not something we want to feel confident in quite yet. Definitely ups and downs, and a rough winter in terms of storms can really make a huge difference in the population. So it's still critical condition for these monarchs. Um, A key thing we can do to helping the monarchs is first understanding the threats. What is hurting them, and what part do we have to play in that hurt, and also the remedy to it. So first of all, the threats, right? We have habitat loss, factors like development, so urban sprawl moving further out into more wild lands, rather than infill and building in areas that we've already developed, and kind of densifying our cities, is a factor here. Agriculture as well, so converting land use from, again, more wild preserved lands into industrial monocrops, which give us food, but aren't always the best way, or done in the best of places in terms of ecological impact. And then logging as well on overwintering grounds. So monarchs, they'll come to the California coast and they'll look for specific kinds of trees. Eucalyptus trees, even though they're not native to California, are actually a favorite for monarch butterflies. And let's say someone, uses that land, there's eucalyptus on it, and they want to build a house or build a road. Those eucalyptus trees get cut down, and when the monarchs come back next year, the trees are no longer going to be there. If they don't find another grove to live in for the winter, they are going to suffer and perish. So that's important to consider when managing a site, or advocating for the management of a site. Another factor is pesticide and herbicide use. So we might be using these chemicals on a very specific plot of land for a specific purpose, but there's oftentimes unintended drift into habitat through air, through water, uh, and that can really hurt the monarch butterflies and their caterpillars. Climate change, of course, is a huge factor. Things like drought, rising temperatures that are making habitats less livable for monarch butterflies, and also throwing off their signals to migrate, or their reproductive cycles, and overwintering periods. Non-native milkweed is another interesting point to talk about. Milkweed is basically a host plant for monarch butterflies and their caterpillars. It's what they're looking for when they're, flying and looking to lay their eggs. But there's many different kinds of milkweed. There are some milkweeds that are native to California, and there are some that have been brought here from tropical regions, for example, which the monarchs can use. But they are not from our climate. They're not going to react in the same way as a native milkweed would. And because of that, they don't go dormant in the wintertime like native milkweed in California would. Basically, you have this tropical plant, it's active year round, and that has two main negative impacts on the monarchs. The first one being the leaves are never going to die back, and there's a parasite that can be hosted on a milkweed plant. If you have a plant that dies to the ground, that parasite is going to be killed off year to year, and the impact is going to be mitigated. If you have the same plant year over year and there hasn't been that cycle of dormancy and regrowth, that parasite can still be present, and now you're going to have lingering effects from it. Migrational impacts are the other piece to that. If the plant doesn't die back, the monarchs might not get proper signals to move on, find different sites, and migrate, which is then gonna, impact their reproduction, continuity of their lives. And then the last note here, a key threat is just general lack of nectar sources. So monarch or otherwise, I mean, milkweed or otherwise, adult butterflies are looking for flowers, looking for nectar to feed on. And if there's no flowering plants, pollinator-friendly plants to feed on, they're not going to be able to get energy and continue their lives and continue their cycle. So what can we do about all of this? We can preserve and restore habitat. So where these plants that are good for pollinators are thriving, keep them in place, help them grow, help proliferate them. Where they are not present, try to restore it, right? Plant some native plants in the parkway between the sidewalk and the street where you live, or have a pot on your balcony with some pollinator-friendly flowers. Um, Go to a community garden and do some work there. There's lots of ways to contribute to this ongoing effort. Avoid using pesticides. Integrated pest management can be a great alternative to this, and biodiversity of plants and having lots of different kinds of insects and birds and other life in your garden can really help reduce the need for pesticides because you create this ecosystem in itself of things feeding on each other and keeping populations in check. Plant caterpillar host plants, plant adult nectar sources, um, and provide a water source as well. That's good for birds. That's good for some insects too. So a nice, shallow source with maybe a rock to sit on or something so they don't drown can really help. And then just a general refresher here of the butterfly life cycle. We're going to go way back to fourth grade. Basically, you have your milkweed plant, right? The monarch comes along, lays its egg on the leaf. Caterpillar comes out, and over the course of just a few days, that caterpillar munches on the leaves of your milkweed plant and gets really, really big, multiple times its size of when it came out of the egg. And hungry caterpillar, you're going to see the effect on the plant. Leaves are going to get munched up, but it's for a good cause. um, and then they go into their chrysalis and come out as an adult, continue the cycle later on. The adult is less specialized than the caterpillar. The caterpillar is really feeding on that milkweed plant alone. The adult can kind of fly around and sample many different flowers, but it's a general overview of the life cycle. And the beautiful thing is, if you plant it, they will come. So here's a bunch of pictures of milkweed on the top and just general, garden surrounding photos on the bottom. And you plant plants that the pollinators like, and sure enough, soon you're going to see either eggs show up on the leaves or caterpillars munching or butterflies fluttering around. And it's really a beautiful and interesting sight to watch and be a part of. So definitely, if you have any sort of outdoor space for it, um, get involved and try it yourself because it's really cool to participate in and have some form of a relationship with these insects. What are we doing at CSUN for all of this? So you might have seen these signs around campus. They say pollinator habitat, and if you look nearby them, you're going to see that these areas don't have lawns. Instead, they're normally heavily mulched to keep weeds down, keep moisture in, replenish the soil. And the plants are going to be a variety of plants, lots of different kinds, not just one kind of plant, dotting the space. And generally, they'll be either native plants or at least drought tolerant plants. So plants that maybe came from another part of the world, but they have a similar climate to California, don't need a lot of water, and produce flowers that pollinators can use. These sites are popping up all around campus. Physical plant management has been great about getting more and more of these sites in to replace lawns around campus. So definitely take a look around if you haven't noticed these already. Um, Go up to one, look at a plant that's in them and look at it for just a couple of seconds longer, and you'll probably see lots of life going on within the flowers, within the leaves. It can be really, really cool to dive into. Another thing we do here at CSUN is called B Campus USA. So this is basically a certification that CSUN gets as a recognition of the efforts that the Institute for Sustainability and the university as a whole has put into um, having habitat for pollinators, but also involving people in their health. So doing educational programming like this, service learning programming to get students involved, and really just having promoting a culture of support for pollinators and making sure that the tangible impact of having those plants there and cared for is upheld. We also have a garden and seed library on campus. This is something you can get involved in. It's up on the north side of campus, just behind Northridge Academy High School. And as of, you know, 2012, this was pretty much just dirt, not really being used. And even as recently as January 2021, about half of this site was just just gravel, with a couple garden beds that we were growing food in. And now, if you go up there, it's thriving. There's dozens of species of native plants. It's wildflower super bloom up there every spring. And we have lots of milkweed and lots of monarch butterflies using that milkweed. So definitely come on up. It's just on the way to the dorms, past the tennis courts. Take a look, sit down, spend some time. It's a really beautiful space. And we always need volunteer help up there as well. So please do jump in and volunteer if you're interested. Here are some more photos of the site, just different pollinators that we have enjoying the different kinds of plants that are growing there. This was a program we did with a public art class at CSUN. They painted 6 planters with monarch butterfly themes from their life cycle, their migration patterns, and now every year we plant milkweed in those pots for them to enjoy. And all those programs, right, those are more long-term, long-running things. But what can you do right now? I mentioned this study before from the journal called Science that talked about butterfly populations in the Western United States. And the data for this study actually came from community scientists, and that's you. Um, there's this really cool platform called iNaturalist, and it is used around the world to observe and share insights and identification on all different forms of life: plants, fungi, birds, reptiles, insects. Whatever you're interested in, you can put it on this app and contribute to the community, and also learn from the community about what you're looking at. So what we're going to do is download the app and make an account. We're going to use it to observe pollinator activity on CSUN's campus. Of course, feel free to use your account for whatever you like. If you're interested in birds, interested in reptiles, go ahead, use it around your home, post whatever you like. But for now, I'm just going to talk about using this for pollinators. When you open up the app, it's going to bring you to this Explore tab, and you can see observations from other users on either a map format as tiles or in list form. So here's an image of CSUN, and you can see we have a lot of observations, kind of a hotspot for observations in the San Fernando Valley. If you want to contribute an observation to this map, you're going to hit the Observe button, which is in the center of that bottom ribbon on your screen. You should have a camera icon. That's going to take you to the Observe tab. So now you can either choose to take a new photo within the app, or what I recommend is to take photos on your device through your regular camera app and then upload them after the fact. It's just a bit quicker, a bit easier to kind of delete photos that came out blurry that you don't want, and then upload the ones that you like. Um, some tips on taking good photos. You are going to want these photos to be of a good enough quality and good enough detail where somebody can identify what you're looking at. So if you know the species that you're looking at, that's great. But this app, the data is more useful to scientists when multiple people have said, yes, I also see this species. I agree with you. This is correct. And now scientists can look at that data and say, okay, great. If this record, I only want ones that multiple people agreed on, and I'll trust that. They can filter to that and use it. So take the best photos you possibly can. That means making sure they're in focus and taking lots of photos at different angles. You never really know what features are going to be the identifying factor between one species or another. So get those details. Of course, only observe what you're comfortable with. If you are really afraid of bees, you don't have to photograph bees. If you're okay with insects that can bite or sting. Let's say you're trying to observe a wasp, right? Obviously, don't go up and harass the wasp and try to catch it. Keep a safe distance, take photos at different angles, but just make sure you're comfortable and you're safe as you're doing so. Um, then once you have those photos, you can go ahead and create an observation. So iNaturalist, the assumption is that every individual of a species that you're seeing, you are taking one or creating one observation. So if you see 10 monarch butterflies, make 10 observations that say monarch butterfly and post that to the app. That helps to show kind of quantities in the data, as well as just data on what you are seeing. Um, and you can post up to 4 photos per observation of the platform. So that's where you can get different angles of the individual insect in your shot. And then iNaturalist will help you categorize this for people to find and contribute to. You can either type in what you think the species is, or you can use iNaturalist AI tool. So here, for example, I took a picture of a praying mantis. Um, iNaturalist recognized that this was in the mantids family, didn't know exactly what species, but gave me this family to start with. So you can assign it there. And then someone who's really interested in mantises out in the community can search for this and do some identification for you. You are also going to want to add any relevant notes. So maybe what kind of plant it was sitting on, any interesting behaviors you saw. This is optional, but there's a notes field if you care to use it. What's really essential though is that the date and time is correct. So this also helps with data, um, finding when different insects might be active during the year or even during specific times of day. Make sure you have a location on your photo. This is really important because this is location-based data. If you don't have location services enabled, your photo might not be automatically geotagged or the app might not know where you are. So just make sure that if it says no location, you go ahead and use these crosshairs to pinpoint the location where you took the photo. And then once all that is set, just check your work on this details tab and go ahead and hit share. Now that that's done, you can go into your Me tab and view a list of the observations that you have put out to the community. You'll start seeing these little speech bubbles with comments to the right that tell you, which ones the community has started commenting on. And that'll look something like this, kind of a conversation between you and other users. Here's, for example, my page. I saw this butterfly, had no idea what it was, but I knew it was a butterfly. So I posted it under butterflies, and somebody then came in and said, oh, yeah, this is a swallowtail. And then someone else was able to see this is a tiger swallowtail or something like that. And then this last person said, okay, yeah, this is actually a Western tiger swallowtail. And now we're down to the specific species of butterfly when at first when I saw this insect, I had no idea what it was, just knew it was a butterfly. So now I've learned more. And there's a really detailed record out there in the community that's publicly accessible data. So where does the data go? This data, the whole world is contributing to it. iNaturalist, this is a heat map of observations. It's used all around the world. And you can go to the site and filter the data to a pretty specific area of interest or research focus. So you can search by date, you can search for a specific subset of animal, look in a specific geographic region, and that's where the data is getting pulled from for these studies, like the one we were talking about before, of Western US butterflies. It's coming from here. The scientists are pulling it from this source, and you can pull it as well and take a look at what's living in the CSUN garden, what's living on campus, what's living in your neighborhood, and really just explore. I'm going to just leave these resources up here for a minute if you want some more tips on milkweed, native plants in general, just garden care tips to get started or care for a space you have access to. You could take a look at these. But otherwise, thank you so much for your attention and your participation in this. you have any questions or you want to get involved more, feel free to reach out to the Institute for Sustainability. Our Instagram and our newsletter sign up link are on the screen, and more information can be found at our website. Thanks so much.